All right, and welcome to this stream. We're here on the MakeCode for MicroBit stream. Hello, everybody. And today we're going to be talking about the new beta and some of the features. So this is the MicroBit beta show, and we're going to be talking about GitHub integration. All right, so what is GitHub and why is it cool and why you may want to use it in your classroom? Let's take a look first at GitHub. You may have heard of this. This is kind of a geeky website where many companies, they use this enterprise to store their source code, and also that's where developers collaborate to write software. And collaboration is hugely important these days to build software. Imagine we're all stranded at home right now. We're still working together on the software, and we use GitHub as a way to communicate code, tell each other if there's a problem, review each other's code, and things like that. So this is hugely important to learn that collaboration is going to happen when you're doing source code. It's a huge part of the coding experience. Now GitHub is kind of enterprisey, and it may be very complicated. I don't understand all the Git stuff. So it may be a bit scary at first, and we thought, what about bringing that into MakeCode so that you can get kind of a feeling what GitHub is, but you don't have to become an expert from day one. And that's what we're going to show today. We're going to show how students who are doing blocks are able to do coding in MakeCode. And so Randy mentioned there was an announcement about something called Code Spaces, which is going to be an easy way to spin up a code editor and code GitHub, and that will work really well for text-based programming, but when you're doing blocks, that's going to be a bit harder. So we're here in MakeCode, and I'm just going to create a GitHub demo project. So that's just as usual. We're in the beta. So to get into the beta, you're going to do /beta. And you can do all the coding you want here. I'm going to do kind of a classic one, which is toggling random images here. Always looks good. Here we go. And yeah, if you have comments about the beta, go to our GitHub or go to our forum. You can send a message there. All right, so I'm toggling things. I've got some code here. What I can do, or actually let's build a counter. Okay, so I've got an empty project, and what I want to do is I want to save it in my account on GitHub so that I can give it to my teacher, or I can use it on a different machine if I'm sharing a machine, and so forth. So what you're going to do is you're going to click on this icon here. Right at the bottom, it has a little GitHub icon. It's kind of hidden next to the save button. And the first time you do that, if you're not signed in yet, you're going to have to sign in. Now, you really have, you're going to need an account on GitHub, and the account is free. However, there are age restrictions, and they differ between countries. In the US, it's going to be 13-year-old, but also that's different based on where you're located. So you want to check that. But if you meet the requirements, you can get a free account on GitHub, and this is going to build. If you're a student, this is going to build your persona. This is going to build like your coding kind of history. This is very useful for you to kind of showcase your work in the future. Right, so I'm already signed in this browser, so I'm just going to click sign in. It's going to go to GitHub, sign in, and back. And now it's going to tell me, do you want to build a little repository? And repository is the name of a single project in GitHub. And, cool project. All right. So what we do now is that we are populating this repository in GitHub, adding all the files that MakeCode needs. MakeCode has a few files that you're not seeing behind the blocks that we use to store metadata and reload the project. But that complexity is not shown to you. You don't have to know about that. The most important thing you'll see is that now you're seeing GitHub is the way you're going to save things. All right, and it has this GitHub icon, and in fact, it has a check mark. And the check mark means all your changes have been saved to GitHub in the cloud, and they're safe. Like your machine can catch fire. Your code is in the cloud. You're not going to lose it, unless you use your GitHub account, which is problematic. But as far as this browser, if you clear your browser cache, anything like that, it's still there. All right, so if I make a change, so I add a variable, it's going to be my counter, and I set it to 0 here. So I'm doing some coding here. As far as I've made some changes, and maybe I go and change the counter by 1. If you watched the show yesterday, you know that we have a debugger, so you can step through and see that the counter is nicely incrementing. This is very nice. So my code is working. I'm in a checkpoint in my source code where it works, and I know that it works, and I don't want to do more changes before I go on to the next step in my coding, because I might break it. And this is very common. Think of a sandbox. Like you're going to want to do checkpoints, and checkpoints are going to be, I'm going to push it to GitHub so that I can undo that. All right, now you'll see that there's an arrow here. And the arrow means there are changes locally that are not in GitHub. That means if you leave this machine and you don't come back, you will lose those. So whenever you're finishing a session in GitHub, you want to push things so that they're safe in the cloud. We don't automatically save to the cloud. All right, so one thing that's important in GitHub is that when you click on this, you're going to be used to see this view. And this view is somewhat simplification of what you do in GitHub in usual. So you've got, the first thing is a text box that lets you describe what, in kind of a human terms, in natural language term, what you did. So I'm going to say added counter variable, right? That's your intent for the code. And this is very helpful when you come back later and you're like looking at your code and wondering, what did you do? Why did you do this? And then maybe there's a little message to it's basically a message to your future self saying, this is really what I wanted to do. These buttons uploads the code. So we'll go back to that one. And then we've got the diff view, and we call diff. Diff is a way to look at code, 2 versions of code, and showing differences. So for blocks, what we're going to do is we're going to grayscale any block that hasn't changed or moved. We're going to hash mark blocks that have been deleted, and we're going to just highlight with the regular colors blocks that have been added, that have been moved, that have been changed in any way. So it's just a hint for you to look at your code, at a small portion of your code, and look at the changes. And we call that reviewing code. And reviewing code lets you check whether your intent on what you changed the code is what is happening. And for example, you can look at, did I really want to do this? Why did I change this code? Maybe you had like some accidental edits and things like that. So it's very recommended, but you train students at always reviewing their code before pushing and committing. It's just like when you return a math assignment, you just redo the math one more time, and then you find a lot of errors. So let's do that. We'll come back to more features here. So you click on commit, and you'll need internet connection, but this will create what we call a commit, which is really a save. It saves a snapshot of your code to the cloud, to GitHub. If you ever want to see GitHub or see what's in there, there's this icon here on the top right. I'm going to click on that. And it opens this project in GitHub. So GitHub it's a bit more heavy. It has a lot of features that you can learn. you can see all the files here that have been added over the time. Now the second row is the comment that was added on the last commit. So you can see that some files were modified a bit later than others. But there is here in the top corner your history. And that is really the history for the whole project. So if you have to review what a student did, you know, there's a question about where is the code, look at the commit. This is the full history of commits that have gone to GitHub. Nothing is lost here. If it made it to GitHub, it is there. There's no such things as, oh, I lost the commit is gone or something like that. It stays there. There's a lot of features in GitHub that we'll see. It's also important to note that there's a file in your project called Readme, and we pre-populated with some information about how you can reopen this project in MakeCode. All right, so this is the GitHub view, but in general, hopefully you don't have to go there. You may have to go there when you start to get more experience. But as far as a student who's just using GitHub to save his work, he doesn't have to go there. All right, so the counter is a bit aggressive. I'm going to go and I'm going to instead increment on 1 and show the count. So I made some change, and then we get into this flow. Make changes. Wait for my simulator to restart. Doesn't want to restart. Some got stuck. All right. I guess we're gonna have to. Maybe if we go out and go back in. All right, it's happy now. 1, 2, 3 looks good. I can use again the debugger. Can put a breakpoint here, or I can do slow-mo, which is really handy. 2. Looking pretty good. All right, so I'm getting into this mode of edit, test, commit. You've got a little change, you want to save it, go ahead and do a commit. You can see that we deleted forever and we added all this code. So I'm going to say move the counter to a button press. All right. And I can just commit. Your students can commit as much as they want. The more the better. The smaller changes they commit, the easier it is to actually go and read them and understand them. So that's really important. And again, if you're in this view and there are no local changes, that means you're good. All your changes are saved. Otherwise, you either want to commit them or revert them. We're going to see that. So for example, let's say I really messed up my code. It's completely broken. And there's two things that can happen here. So there's changes that are appearing here. I'm gonna go here. And the diff is so big that it just says, everything changed. So there's one thing you can do, which is revert. That means it's going to revert to the latest version that is in GitHub. So it's going to destroy all your local changes for that file. And when I do that, you'll see that there's a confirmation dialog, so you can't mess up, and it's red. And when you do that, you're back to safety and you're back to a happy state. So that's very nice, because that means you can really goof around. But you've got this checkpoint. It's like you're climbing a cliff, but you're attached not too far. So even if you fall a few feet, it's going to be okay. Maybe you do a lot of checkpoints, so you fall a few inches. It's even better. So that's your first line of defense against, I really messed up my code, and now it's completely destroyed. Now let's say I accidentally break my program. Really bad bug introduced accidentally. All right, so I commit that, I didn't look at it, and now my revert doesn't work anymore because the last version in GitHub is broken, and that's really sad. I'm looking at my code, it's like, ooh, broken. So that's not good. How do I come back to a previous version? You're going to click on History. I'm going to look at the History tab. So in the GitHub view, there's a history. If you look at View Commits, you're going to see the whole history of commits grouped by date. So this is May 8th, and there were 5 commits today. If I click on that, you'll see the time and the comment on each of these commit. So this is the current commit. There's no changes with the current changes. But if I take the previous one, I see that there were some changes. Unfortunately, we can't render them. There's too much changes. And in fact, these are more changes from this state to the previous state. So if you remember when your code was okay, what you can do is you can say restore. So I say, yeah, I really want to, come back to yesterday's version because I knew yesterday it worked and now it doesn't work. So I'm going to do that. And let's see what it happens. It's not going to erase your history, and this is very important. So you can still show your teacher that you've done work. What it's going to do, it's basically going to bump up this version on top of the history, and you'll see what I mean there. So we're going to basically move the pointer, in a sense, to that version. So now we're back in a happy version. But if I go to the history, you'll see that I have 6 commits now. And one of them is called restore. So when you're going to look at a history of your project, everything is in there. Once it's in there, it never leaves it. We never erase history. But what you'll see is that it is gonna create a new commit that says, hey, I restored a previous version of this. So you have full undo from the start of your project, from time 0. Just don't go there, otherwise you're going to break your project entirely. I'll probably have to filter that out. So there's a full, and that's also a very nice advantage of the GitHub integration, is that you can actually go back, you can audit, you can recover from mistakes very easily there. So what I've shown here is mostly how to use GitHub alone. So again, if you have your GitHub project, what you can do is, if you have the link, let's say I have the link here. There's multiple ways you can import this project. You can either look at your list of repositories, or you can just import a URL into the project. And if you look at the page here, it does have information about how to reload your project into GitHub. All right. So that's in a nutshell. Now I don't like my changes here. I'm just gonna revert them. All right. So this is in a nutshell how you're using GitHub and MakeCode alone. So this is a one-person project with a single branch in blocks. Collaboration in blocks is not fully fledged, so it gets a bit more harder, but it can work really nicely in text-based. So let's say you're now in JavaScript. Let's take a look at that. So what we have in JavaScript is we've got the Explorer view. So it also shows us which file kind of changed, and it's going to show us. Maybe I move this in and out. It's going to show a different view on the text. Now the GitHub button is still there. And now you're going to see that this line was removed and this line was added. And also this is some internal flag that tells us that you're doing a TypeScript project rather than a blocks project. I can say move to TypeScript, move to JavaScript. I can do that. All right. And now I've got, I can go back and do my code and do the same flow where maybe I'm adding 2. The arrow changes. I can test my code. Looks good. Commit. Look at the diff. And push the changes. And this is a habit that you want your students or you want yourself to get into so you save your work. It's much easier to look at small commits than massive changes. Also easier to kind of pinpoint when you completely broke your project. All right, so I'm going to show something. We're going to talk about collaboration here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend another student is working on this. And for that, I'm just going to go in, make an edit in GitHub. So let's say someone made a change and made it to 4. So we made a change here. You can see that there's a change in here that just happened. If I go back to MakeCode, the first thing you're going to see is that there is an arrow down here, pull changes. And there's an arrow down here, pull changes. This is telling you someone else is working on your project, and that someone else has made changes and has pushed those changes to GitHub, so you might want to get them. It's very common that you're going to want to work together, and working collaboration today works really well when you're doing text-based. We're still working. We're still kind of figuring out exactly what we're going to do with blocks. But for text-based, it works really well. So you can do pull changes. And what it's going to do is going to pull the changes and integrate them into your source code. Kind of synchronize yourself with what your friends are doing. And now you see that it's 4. So that's going to be very common that if you have 2 students working on something, they're going to start producing changes, and then they're going to start merging. So you'll want to push your changes along the way. Now, what may happen is that, let's say now I change this to 6, but also my friend who's working on the same exact piece of code is going to change that and is going to make that change to 5. So the cloud said, oh, so my friend said, no, we should jump by 5, and I'm saying we should jump by 6. So the question is, who wins? Well, we don't know, so we're going to ask you to figure it out. And that's called a merge conflict. So now you're seeing that I have a local change, and there's changes that need to be pulled. If I try to commit, what's going to happen is going to say, oh, you have a merge conflict. And you need to figure out who's going to win. Is it the 5, or is it the 6, or is it something else? And what you're going to see is you're going to see this UI here. You're going to see this orange box. It's meant to be kind of half friendly. It says you have GitHub, you have changes from GitHub that are conflicting with your local changes. You can keep your local changes. That means you say 6 is the winner, or you look at your friend's change and say, remote is the winner because I think 5 is a better solution. So you can decide, if you click here, I'm going to keep that line. If you click here, I'm going to. Or you can decide it's more complex. Sometimes the merge are complicated. You have to kind of massage the code and rewrite it in case you're going to keep both. I'm going to do keep local. And now I'm back into having a change because I made a change with respect to what's in GitHub, but I can actually commit the change again, and now it's going to go through. And this is something that happens in when we develop software, professional software, we develop that. We try to avoid merge conflicts. This is a good time to kind of have a game plan and decide who's working on what so that you can avoid, they're not really pleasant. And you can avoid them if you organize yourself and you kind of set up who's going to do changes and what in the project. One way to avoid conflicts is to use other files in your project. So if you're doing text-based coding, first of all, you can get rid of the blocks. No more blocks. But also, you can say, oh, you know, the counter logic is going to be in a new file. So I've got, you know, my my counter logic, and I'm defining a function. So I'm going to have a counter variable, and I'm doing this counter plus equals 1, and then also I'm going into here, and I'm going to move this counter to be here. Add 1. So I'm gonna put that into a namespace. And for example, if I'm the person who's building the counter, I expect to be the only one to be working on that, and that will minimize conflicts. So I can get the counter, and then I can show it. So let's say you have 2 students in a project. Whenever it decides that, oh, there's a bug. Yeah, something happened here. Looks like we're in the beta. And it's really unhappy. Counter, counter, counter. And I have to export my function and return counter. No more squiggle. And that's called add 1. All right. No more red dots here. Everything seems fine. Great. And if I press A, I got double parentheses here, which is really not what I wanted. And I get my program to work again. So coming back to using GitHub in a group, maybe the first student is working on this and improving how the counter works, and then another person using it here. So you can use files to kind of split out your code if your code becomes big, and also avoid conflicts. When you go into the diff, you'll see multiple diffs, and you'll be able to revert them individually if you want to. Or you can also create a commit for everything here. All right. One thing that's important to know is that if you want to work with someone else, you're going to have to allow them in your project. So under the arrow here, there is invite collaborators. And that takes you to the invite collaborators window, for which I don't have my password set up, but this will allow you to add people to your project. We'll cover that in a future video. All right, so there's a few things that you see when you're in text mode. And we're going to segue into extensions. The first one is release zone. And release zone is very helpful when you do extensions. It provides a version number. So when you have a really stable version for your extension, for your project, you can create a release. That means you're going to give it a number, a version number. It's very common in software to use something called Semver. It's a release numbering scheme that is used by many companies. So when you see 3 numbers for a version, the first one is called major. That means you completely rewrote the software, and it's probably, if you have a V2, it might not be compatible with V1. So if you decide to go there, that means you really made a massive change to your software. Second one is minor change. And minor change means you maybe have added a few functions or a few optional parameters, but you don't expect any existing code that's using your code to break. And patch is really, you just fix some bugs, and it's a minor change. So typically you're going to do patch So you can just do create release. And what it does, it creates a release in GitHub. So GitHub has a facility to create release. And this is also used by MakeCode when you're using this package to know which is the latest stable version. The next button you see under is called GitHub Pages. And then the interesting thing about it's a very cool feature in GitHub. It allows to turn every repository you create into a web page, a fully hosted website. And every time you do commit, it recompiles your extension. So if I click on this, it'll take me to my compiled project home screen. And you can see that this is familiar. This is the readme.md. This is the readme that has been rendered into a home page. So if I go back here, and if I want to edit that, I'm going to go to the readme. And the readme is written in a language called Markdown. And Markdown is a wiki language. It's quite similar to like what you do in Wikipedia, but a different format. It's very popular in developer tools. It's supported out of the box in GitHub. So that's mainly the reason why we're using that. And what I can do, for example, here, say, this is a little project that will count how many times you pressed A on a microphone. All right, made a change. If I expand this on the right, I'm going to get hopefully a preview. I might have to hit enter, and then it may take like 10 seconds, but eventually you should get a preview of this of the Markdown, or maybe not. It's like we don't have a preview anymore. All right, that's the beta, so we'll figure out why the preview doesn't update. All right, once you made your changes to the README, what you can do is click here. The other thing you want to do, if you're going full text, you can remove the block preview because you're not using that. Just keep that part. It's used for search. All right, same thing as usual. This is new text. Red is deleted text, and you also have the markers, the minus and the plus markers. And updated the README. Can do that. And as soon as I'm done committing, GitHub will trigger a build and we'll start refreshing my website. So while this window is rotating, that means it's actually re-rendering, rebuilding my little website. You can use the README to explain what your code is doing, how to use it. You can build a full manual there. And it's going to give you a very nice web page for that. So it may take a few seconds. And then you can reopen it. And then now you can see that my sentence has been added and so forth. One quick note, if you're interested, if you go to the GitHub settings of your project, you can actually change. There's a few themes that are in there. So you can change the theme of your GitHub pages and make it more dramatic. So maybe I choose, we're going to go for this more engineering theme. So just do that. GitHub will make a little change in your, see it made a little change in your settings. And now once it's done building, it looks cool, it looks different. So there's a few themes you can have fun with. And this is all, so every project you save in GitHub actually has a web page associated to it where you can document what you did in text and also explain how to use the program. If you're in GitHub, you can add images and things like that as well. All right, so, and you see that now I've made a change, so I need to pull it down. Now I'm synced with the cloud. So this is the release zone. If you're writing an extension, you want to create release. Just for completeness, if you go into the GitHub project, you'll see that there is a setting here called release. So we made one release. and that was version 001. And if I create another release, then once this is done and I refresh the page, I have 2 releases. When you're using GitHub to create extensions, MakeCode will automatically use the latest release. All right, so we've got a cool project here, and we're already 36 minutes in. So I will cover GitHub further, and I will talk about everything you need to know about using GitHub to do extensions, and also I will do another show about using GitHub to do tutorials. So this was using GitHub from a student's perspective in a very simple way. So you can do all your work from the master branch. There's facilities to merge changes when you collaborate. We'll cover more advanced topics on GitHub about branching and also extensions and tutorials. But this was pretty much the basic work of GitHub, and then once it is in your account in GitHub, you will never lose that project, right? And that's a project you can share with your friends, or even further down a few years, kind of look back at it and forgot how beautiful the code you wrote when you started. So that's coming up in the MakeCode beta, and send us your comments. If you have any, you can get us on our forum or through the support for micro:bit.org. See you for another episode next week.